The morning Loretta Sinclair's father died. He used his last breath to tell her she looked like a scarecrow in her only dress, and she should have married the banker's son when she had the chance. She stood beside his bed in their cramped Boston boarding house room, the gray wool dress hanging loose on her thin frame, patched at the elbows and frayed at the hem. She was 22 years old and had worn the same dress for 3 years, alternating with one other that was somehow in worse condition. Her mother had died when Loretta was 17, taking with her any knowledge of sewing, mending, or making a life feel like more than bare survival. Her father had been a clerk, then a drunk, then an invalid, and now he was gone, leaving her with $4, 2 dresses that should have been rags years ago, and no prospects whatsoever. The landlady gave her 2 days to clear out. Loretta sold everything that could be sold, which amounted to her father's pocket watch and a pair of cufflinks he had somehow never pawned. She bought a ticket west with money she did not have, climbing aboard a train in April of 1876 with a carpet bag containing both dresses, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and a photograph of her mother. The ticket took her as far as San Antonio, and from there she used the last of her coins to join a mail coach heading toward the far western edge of Texas, to a place called Terlingua, where she had heard a wealthy widow needed a companion. The letter had been posted in a Boston newspaper 3 months earlier, and Loretta had written immediately, inventing a past that included needlework skills she did not possess and references from families who did not exist. The widow had written back with cautious interest, and Loretta had clung to that single piece of correspondence like a lifeline ever since. The journey took 2 weeks of rattling across endless plains, through towns that grew smaller and more desperate the farther west they traveled. The other passengers changed at every stop, but Loretta remained, her dresses growing more rumpled, her face more drawn. She wore the gray dress because the brown one was even worse, and she tried not to think about what she would do if the widow took one look at her and shut the door. They arrived in Terlingua on a Thursday afternoon when the sun was beating down like a hammer on an anvil. The town was barely a town at all, just a scattering of adobe buildings and wooden shacks clustered around a mining operation, with the Chisos Mountains rising in the distance like the spine of some ancient beast. The air was dry enough to crack lips and hot enough to make breathing feel like work. The driver pointed toward a building that served as the general store, post office, and apparently the only source of information in 50 miles. Loretta climbed down with her carpet bag, her legs shaking from the journey, and walked inside. The man behind the counter looked at her with the weary expression of someone who had seen too many desperate people pass through. "Help you?" "I'm looking for Mrs. Catherine Holbrook," Loretta said. "She's expecting me. I'm to be her companion." The man's expression shifted to something that might have been pity. "Mrs. Holbrook died 6 weeks ago. Consumption." The words hit Loretta like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, gripping the counter to keep from falling. "She's dead. Buried up on the hill. I'm sorry, miss. Did you come far?" Loretta could not make her mouth form words. She nodded. "You got people to wire? Money to get back?" She shook her head. The man sighed, reaching under the counter. "Look, there's a boarding house of sorts over at the Chisos Mining Company. Mrs. Patterson might have a bed for a few nights if you can work for your keep. After that." He shrugged. "Not much here for women alone, I'm afraid. Some of the miners' wives might need help, but it's hard living out here." Loretta took the directions with numb fingers and walked back into the blazing heat. The town looked even more desolate now, just dust and desperation baking under an indifferent sun. She made her way to the boarding house, a long adobe structure with a sagging porch, and knocked on the door. Mrs. Patterson was a thick woman with suspicious eyes and flour on her hands. She looked Loretta up and down with an expression that suggested she found her lacking. "You running from something?" "No, madam. I came to work for Mrs. Holbrook, but I've just learned she passed. I can work, I can clean and cook, and—" "Can you actually cook, or are you just saying words?" Loretta hesitated. "I can learn quickly." Mrs. Patterson snorted. "That's what I thought. I've got one bed left, shared with 2 other girls who work at the mine office. You can have it for $2 a week, or you can work it off doing laundry. I warn you, it's hard work in this heat, and the miners send through more filthy clothes than you'd think possible." "I'll take it," Loretta said immediately. She spent the rest of that day and the next bent over steaming tubs of water, scrubbing clothes until her hands were raw and her back screamed in protest. The heat was suffocating, made worse by the steam. And she drank water until she felt sick, and then drank more, because everyone kept warning her about the danger of the desert sun. The other women in the boarding house were kind enough but exhausted from their own work, and they fell into bed each night too tired for conversation. On her 3rd day in Terlingua, Loretta woke before dawn with her hands so swollen she could barely make a fist. She stumbled to the washing tubs in the gray pre-dawn light and stared at the mountain of dirty clothes waiting for her. The brown dress clung to her back, damp with sweat before the sun had even risen. And she thought with a desperate kind of clarity that she could not do this forever. She would die here, anonymous and alone, and no one would even know to mourn her. She was elbow deep in wash water when she heard Mrs. Patterson calling her name. "Girl! Loretta, get yourself in here!" Loretta dried her hands on her dress and hurried inside, expecting to be told she had done something wrong, that she was being turned out. Instead, she found Mrs. Patterson standing with a man who made the doorway look small. He was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the room. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was tanned and weathered, with a heavy beard that could not hide the strong line of his jaw. His arms were bare, muscles clearly defined under sun-darkened skin, and he wore buckskin pants and a shirt that looked like he had made it himself. Everything about him spoke of raw strength and hard living, and Loretta found herself taking an involuntary step backward. "This is Garrett Morrison," Mrs. Patterson said. "He's got a proposition for you." The man Garrett looked at Loretta with eyes that were startlingly blue in his tanned face. His gaze moved over her quickly, assessing, and she was suddenly painfully aware of how awful she must look, her dress stained and damp, her hair escaping its pins. "Madam," he said, and his voice was deep, rough at the edges. "I apologize for the intrusion. Mrs. Patterson tells me you're new to Terlingua and looking for work." "I have work," Loretta said, though even she could hear how uncertain it sounded. "Washing clothes until your hands bleed," Mrs. Patterson interjected. "Don't be proud, girl. Listen to what the man has to say." Garrett shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "I live up in the mountains, about 15 miles from here. I trap and hunt, sell the furs and meat. It's a good living, but it's isolated. I'm looking for a wife." The words seemed to suck all the air from the room. Loretta stared at him, certain she had misheard. Garrett continued, his gaze steady on hers. "I know how this sounds. I'm not trying to buy a woman or trick anyone into anything. I'm just being practical. I need a wife, someone to keep the house and help with the work. And from what Mrs. Patterson tells me, you need a situation that doesn't involve destroying your hands in a laundry tub. I'm offering marriage, legal and proper, with respect and fair treatment. You'd want for nothing. I'd provide for you, protect you, and treat you decent. That's my word." Loretta's mind was reeling. You don't even know me. No, madam, I don't. But I know what I can offer, and I know you're in a hard spot. I'm not expecting an answer right this second. I'm in town for 2 more days, getting supplies. You can think on it, ask around about me if you want. I'm not a perfect man, but I'm honest, and I keep my word. Why? Loretta asked. Why me? There must be other women? There aren't, Garrett said simply. Not out here. Not unmarried ones. Anyway. And the few who come through are usually already spoken for or not interested in mountain living. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you this morning when I came in for flour. Said you seemed like a hard worker who'd fallen on bad luck. He paused. I'm offering you a choice you didn't have yesterday. That's all. He nodded to both women and walked out, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Loretta turned to Mrs. Patterson, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. You told him about me. I did. And before you get angry about it, let me tell you something. Garrett Morrison is one of the most respected men in this territory. He's been coming to Terlingua for supplies for near 10 years now, and in all that time, I've never heard a bad word about him. He's hard but fair, and when he says he'll treat you decent, you can believe it. You could do a hell of a lot worse, especially out here. But I don't know him. I don't, Loretta's voice cracked. I don't know anything about being a wife. You'd learn, and from what I can see, it beats washing clothes until you collapse. Mrs. Patterson's voice softened slightly. Look, girl, I'm not telling you what to do, but you need to think hard about your options. You've got no money, no prospects, and those dresses you're wearing are about 2 washes away from falling apart completely. Winter comes hard in this desert, and you're not going to survive it doing laundry. At least think about what the man offered. Loretta spent the rest of the day in a daze, scrubbing clothes mechanically while her mind spun in circles. The idea of marrying a complete stranger was insane. It was desperate and reckless and everything she had been raised to avoid. But then, everything in her life had already fallen apart. What did she have to lose? That night, she lay in the narrow bed she shared with 2 other women and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the desert beyond the walls. She thought about her father's last words, about how she looked like a scarecrow, about the banker's son she had not wanted to marry because he had been cruel and small-minded. She thought about the 2 dresses in her carpet bag, both of them nearly unwearable, and how she had not had a real choice about what to wear in years because there was nothing to choose between. She thought about Garrett Morrison's steady blue eyes and the way he had spoken to her with respect, even in her stained, awful dress. In the morning, she found Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen. If I wanted to find Mr. Morrison, where would I look? Mrs. Patterson smiled. Garrett was at the general store, loading supplies into a pack mule's saddlebags. He looked up when Loretta approached, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Hope, maybe, or just wariness. Mr. Morrison, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'd like to accept your offer, if it still stands. He studied her for a long moment. It stands. But I want to be clear about something first. I'm not expecting you to share my bed right away. The cabin has 2 rooms. You can have your own space until you're comfortable. This doesn't have to be anything more than a practical arrangement unless we both want it to be. Do you understand? Loretta felt her face flush, but she nodded. I understand. Then we'll see the preacher today and head up to the cabin tomorrow morning. That work for you? Yes. They were married an hour later in a cramped office that smelled of dust and old paper. The preacher was a wizened man who seemed unsurprised by the hasty arrangement. and he pronounced them husband and wife with perfunctory efficiency. Garrett paid him with coins from a leather pouch and signed the certificate with a steady hand. Loretta signed beneath his name and thought, "This is madness." And also, it's done now. They spent that night in separate rooms at the boarding house, Garrett sleeping in the stable because there were no spare beds. In the morning, he arrived with 2 horses and the pack mule, all of them laden with supplies. He looked at Loretta's thin carpetbag and frowned. "That all you have?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "All right. Can you ride?" "A little. It's been a long time." "This one's gentle." He indicated a roan mare with a white blaze. "Her name's Rosie. She'll take care of you. We've got about 4 hours of riding ahead of us, so let me know if you need to stop and rest." The journey into the mountains was unlike anything Loretta had experienced. They followed narrow trails that wound through rocky terrain, climbing steadily until the air grew cooler and the landscape shifted from desert scrub to pine and juniper. Garrett rode ahead, occasionally turning back to check on her. His posture relaxed and confident in the saddle. Loretta clung to the reins and tried to find a rhythm with the horse's gait, her body protesting the unfamiliar exercise. They stopped once at a small stream where Garrett refilled their canteens and let the animals drink. He handed Loretta a piece of jerky and some dried fruit, watching as she ate. "You doing all right?" he asked. "Yes. It's beautiful up here." He glanced around as if seeing it for the first time. "It is. Can be hard living, especially in winter, but I've always preferred it to town. Too many people there, all crowded together." "You don't like people?" "I like them fine in small doses. But I grew up in these mountains, and I've never felt the need to be anywhere else." He paused. "Might get lonely for you, though. That's something you should know. We're a long way from neighbors." "I don't mind quiet," Loretta said, and it was true she had spent most of her life feeling alone, even when surrounded by people. The idea of isolation did not frighten her as much as it probably should have. They reached the cabin in the early afternoon. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, with the mountains rising steeply behind it. The structure was larger than Loretta had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. There was a smaller outbuilding that she guessed was for storage, and a pen that held a few chickens scratching in the dirt. Garrett dismounted and came to help her down. His hands on her waist were careful, impersonal, and he released her the moment her feet touched the ground. "Welcome home," he said, and there was something almost shy in the way he said it. Inside, the cabin was simple but well made. The main room held a stone fireplace, a heavy wooden table with benches, and a rocking chair positioned near the hearth. There were shelves lined with supplies, hooks for hanging tools and clothes, and windows that let in generous light. A door on the right led to what Loretta assumed was Garrett's bedroom, and another on the left stood open to reveal a smaller room with a narrow bed and a trunk. "That's yours," Garrett said, nodding toward the smaller room. "I cleared it out this past week. There's space in the trunk for your things, and I'll build you a proper dresser when I get the chance." Loretta walked to the doorway and looked inside. The bed had a quilt folded at the foot, and there was a small table with a basin and pitcher. It was sparse but clean, and it was more privacy than she had had in years. "Thank you," she said softly. Garrett shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable again. "I'm going to get the horses settled and bring in the supplies. You can rest if you need to, or look around. Make yourself familiar with everything." He left before she could respond, and Loretta heard him moving outside, his voice low as he spoke to the animals. She stood in the middle of the main room and tried to process the fact that this was her life now. She was married to a man she did not know, living in a cabin in the mountains, miles from anything resembling civilization. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. Over the next few days, they established a cautious routine. Garrett woke before dawn and went to check his trap lines or hunt, returning by mid-morning with game or firewood. Loretta did her best to keep the cabin clean and prepare meals from the supplies he had stocked. Though her cooking skills were rudimentary at best, Garrett never complained, eating whatever she put in front of him with steady determination, though she noticed he took over, making the cornbread after her second attempt turned out dense enough to use as a weapon. He was patient with her, showing her how to work the stove, where he kept different supplies, how to bank the fire properly at night. He spoke in economical sentences, never using two words where one would do. But there was a fundamental kindness in the way he moved around her, giving her space, never crowding or demanding. At night, they sat on opposite sides of the fireplace, Garrett carving or mending tools while Loretta attempted to repair her dresses by lamplight. She was acutely aware that both dresses were becoming unwearable, the fabric so thin and worn that no amount of mending would save them. She tried to make them last, washing them carefully and patching every hole, but it was a losing battle. On the fourth evening, Garrett looked up from the knife he was sharpening and watched her struggling with a needle and thread. "That dress is about done, isn't it?" Loretta's cheeks burned. "I'm making it last as long as I can." I wasn't criticizing. I just meant... He set the knife aside. "You need new clothes. I should have thought of that before. I wasn't thinking clearly when I brought you up here." "It's all right. I'll manage." "No." He stood and went to a chest in the corner, rummaging through it until he pulled out a length of folded fabric. "This was my mother's. She passed 5 years ago, and I kept some of her things. There's fabric here, and I think she had needles and thread somewhere." He brought the items to the table, spreading them out. There were several lengths of fabric in different colors and patterns, a sewing kit, and what looked like a pattern book with pages yellowed by age. "I don't know how to sew," Loretta admitted, her voice small. "My mother died before she could teach me, and I never learned." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "That's all right. I do." She stared at him. "You sew?" "My mother taught me when I was young. She said a man living alone in the mountains needed to know how to mend his own clothes, and she was right. I'm not fancy with it, but I can make a dress that'll hold together and fit properly." He paused, looking almost embarrassed. "I was planning to make you some anyway. I just wanted to have them ready before mentioning it. But I see now that was foolish. You need them sooner rather than later." Loretta did not know what to say. The idea of this large, rough man sitting down to sew dresses felt impossible. And yet he was looking at the fabric with a critical eye, clearly assessing what would work best. "I'll make you 5, he said, as if deciding something. "That way you'll have a real choice about what to wear each day. My mother always said a woman should have that at least, the ability to choose." Something in Loretta's chest cracked open. She thought about her father's last words, about looking like a scarecrow, about spending years wearing the same 2 awful dresses because there was no other option. And here was this man, this stranger she had married out of desperation, offering to make her 5 dresses so she could choose. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Garrett looked at her directly, and his blue eyes were serious. "Because you're my wife. Because you came all the way out here and agreed to make a life with me, even though you had no reason to trust that I'd treat you well. Because everyone deserves basic kindness, and you look like you haven't had much of it in a while." He looked back at the fabric. And because my mother would have boxed my ears if she knew I brought a woman up here without making sure she had decent clothes to wear. Loretta felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Thank you. He nodded and began sorting through the fabric, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate material. Over the next week, Loretta watched in amazement as Garrett worked on the dresses during the evenings. He measured her carefully, his touch impersonal and quick, and then cut the fabric with confidence. His stitches were small and even, and he worked with a focus that suggested this was as natural to him as setting traps or skinning game. He made the dresses simple but well constructed, with practical high necks and long sleeves, fitted at the waist and full in the skirt to allow for movement. The first dress was a deep green that reminded Loretta of the pines surrounding the cabin. Garrett finished it on a Wednesday evening and handed it to her with an awkward clearing of his throat. Try it on. Make sure it fits. I can adjust anything that's not right. Loretta took the dress to her room and put it on with trembling hands. The fabric was soft and sturdy, and when she looked down at herself, she saw a dress that actually fit, that was not patched or stained or falling apart. She walked back into the main room, and Garrett looked up from his work. His expression shifted, something warm flickering in his eyes. It looks good. Fits well. It's perfect, Loretta said, her voice catching. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed. It's what a husband should do. But Loretta knew it was more than that. It was the first time in years that someone had seen her needs and met them without complaint or expectation of return. It was the first time she had worn something that made her feel like a person rather than a burden. The second dress was blue as the sky. The third was a soft brown that Garrett said would be practical for outdoor work. The fourth was a cream color with small flowers. And the fifth was burgundy, richer than anything Loretta had ever owned. When all 5 dresses were finished, Garrett hung them on hooks in her room, spacing them out so she could see them clearly. There, he said with satisfaction. Now you can choose which one you want to wear each morning. Loretta stood looking at them, overwhelmed. 5 dresses, 5 choices. It was such a simple thing, and yet it felt like a kind of freedom she had never experienced. That night, she lay in bed and thought about Garrett Morrison, about the careful way he had sewn each dress, the quiet respect he showed her, the way he had given her space and time to adjust to this new life. She thought about how he had kept his word about the sleeping arrangements, never pushing or demanding, treating her with a courtesy that felt almost old-fashioned. She thought about his hands, so large and rough, creating something beautiful for her. She thought about the way he looked at her sometimes when he did not think she was watching, with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and careful, as if he did not want to scare her away. She was not in love with him, not yet, but she could feel something shifting inside her, some small seed of affection taking root. The days grew longer as spring deepened into early summer. Loretta established routines, learning the rhythms of mountain life. She learned to milk the goats Garrett kept penned near the cabin, to gather eggs from the chickens, to identify which plants were edible and which were poisonous. Garrett taught her with the same patient efficiency he brought to everything, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things that were second nature to him. She wore a different dress each day, taking genuine pleasure in the choice. Some mornings she picked based on practicality, choosing the brown dress for days when she planned to work in the garden Garrett was helping her establish. Other times she chose based on mood, wearing the green when she felt peaceful or the burgundy when she wanted to feel special. Garrett noticed, though he never said anything directly, but she caught him watching her sometimes, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth when she came out of her room in the morning. And she knew he was pleased that she used the dresses, that his gift mattered to her. They began talking more in the evenings, sharing small pieces of their pasts. Garrett told her about growing up in these mountains, the son of a trapper and his wife who had carved out a life in the wilderness. He had a brother who had moved to California years ago, and a sister who had married a rancher in Montana. He spoke about his parents with affection, especially his mother, who sounded like she had been both tough and tender. Loretta told him about Boston, about her mother's death and her father's decline, about the years of scraping by and feeling invisible. She told him about the banker's son, and Garrett's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" Garrett asked, his voice low and dangerous. "No. He was just cruel in small ways, mean-spirited. My father wanted me to marry him because he had money, but I couldn't bring myself to do it." She looked at the fire. "My father never forgave me for that. He thought I was being foolish and romantic, that I should take security where I could find it." "You were being smart," Garrett said firmly. "A man who's cruel will only get worse once he's got you trapped in marriage. You made the right choice." "Did I? I ended up alone anyway, with nothing." "You're not alone now." Garrett's gaze was steady on hers. "And you've got a home and everything you need. That doesn't sound like nothing to me." Loretta felt warmth spread through her chest. "No, I suppose it's not." As the weeks passed, Loretta found herself noticing things about Garrett that made her heart beat faster. The way his muscles moved under his shirt when he was chopping wood, all raw strength and controlled power. The way he was unfailingly gentle with the animals, murmuring to the horses in a low voice that made them nicker and press their noses against his chest. The way he always made sure she ate enough, serving her portions before taking his own. And how he had started making extra coffee in the morning because he had noticed she liked it. She noticed how he kept the path to the water pump clear so she would not trip. How he always made sure the firewood was stocked so she would not have to carry the heavy logs. How he had built a small shelf in her room without asking, just because he had seen her books stacked on the floor and thought they deserved better. She noticed how he never raised his voice, even when he was frustrated. How he listened when she talked. Really listened, his full attention on her like what she said mattered. How he sometimes watched her with an expression that was hungry but also patient, as if he would wait forever for her to come to him willingly. One evening in late June, they were sitting outside watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Loretta was wearing the cream dress with the flowers, and she felt Garrett's gaze on her like a physical touch. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything." "Why did you really want a wife? I know you said it was practical, but there's more to it than that, isn't there?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the horizon. "I got tired of being alone," he said finally. "My parents had a good marriage, real partnership, and I wanted that. I wanted someone to share the work and the silence and the beauty of this place. I wanted someone to talk to in the evenings and wake up to in the mornings. I wanted," he paused, "I wanted what they had. The quiet kind of love that grows over years until you can't imagine life without the other person in it." Loretta's throat felt tight. That's a lot to ask from a stranger. "I know. That's why I was willing to wait, to give you time. I figured if I treated you well and gave you reason to trust me, maybe eventually you'd want those things too." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense. "But I wasn't going to force anything. You can live here as my wife in name only for the rest of our lives, if that's what you need. I'd rather have you here and happy than not have you at all. What if I want more than that? Loretta asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Garrett's expression shifted, hope and desire warring in his features. Then I'd be the luckiest man in these mountains. Loretta stood, her heart pounding, and crossed the small distance between them. Garrett rose to meet her, and they stood facing each other in the fading light. He was so much larger than her, all broad shoulders and contained strength. But there was nothing threatening in the way he looked at her, only want and patience and a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I'd like to kiss you," she said. "If that would be all right?" Garrett's breath caught. That would be more than all right. She rose on her toes, and he bent down, meeting her halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other. Then Garrett's hand came up to cup her face, his palm rough and warm against her cheek, and the kiss deepened. Loretta felt heat spread through her body, pooling low in her belly, and she pressed closer, her hands finding the solid wall of his chest. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." "So have I," Loretta admitted. "I just wasn't sure if you wanted the same thing." "Loretta, I've wanted you since the moment you agreed to marry me, maybe even before that. But I wasn't going to rush you. I wanted you to be sure." "I'm sure," she said, and meant it. She was not in love with him yet, not completely, but she could feel herself falling, tumbling toward something that felt inevitable and right. That night, Garrett did not go to his room. Loretta took his hand and led him to hers, and they learned each other in the darkness. Their touches careful and then less careful, their breaths mingling as they discovered what made the other gasp and sigh. Garrett was patient even in his desire, making sure she was ready before he pressed into her. And when he finally moved inside her, Loretta felt something click into place, like a key turning in a lock. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Garrett's large frame somehow fitting against hers perfectly. He ran his fingers through her hair, his touch gentle. "You all right?" "More than all right," Loretta said. And it was true. She felt cherished in a way she had never experienced, as if her pleasure and comfort mattered as much as his own. From that night forward, they shared a bed. Garrett moved his things into Loretta's room without fanfare, and they fell into the easy intimacy of a couple who had been together far longer than mere months. They woke tangled together, made love in the mornings when the light was soft through the windows, and again in the evenings when the work was done, and they were alone with just the sound of the wind in the pines. Loretta had never been happier. The life was hard in some ways, the isolation, the constant work, the challenges of mountain living, but it was also simple and good. She wore her 5 dresses in rotation, choosing one each morning, and Garrett always noticed, always told her she looked beautiful no matter which one she picked. In August, a traveling preacher came through the area, and Garrett took Loretta down to Terlingua so they could have their marriage blessed in front of witnesses. Mrs. Patterson insisted on throwing a small celebration, and a handful of townspeople came to wish them well. Loretta wore the burgundy dress and felt like a queen, especially with Garrett standing beside her, his hand warm on her back, his pride in her evident to everyone watching. "You look happy?" Mrs. Patterson said, pulling Loretta aside. "I'm glad I told him about you." "So am I," Loretta said honestly. "Thank you for seeing something I couldn't see for myself." They returned to the cabin loaded with gifts from the townspeople, jars of preserves, sacks of flour, a beautiful quilt that one of the miners' wives had made. Loretta felt overwhelmed by the kindness, by the sense that she was part of a community now, even if they lived far from town. That fall, Loretta discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett on a morning when frost silvered the grass and her breath misted in the air. She was wearing the green dress, and she saw his face transform when she spoke the words, joy lighting him from within. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled her close, careful even in his excitement. "We're having a baby." "Are you happy?" Loretta asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy doesn't even come close," Garrett said. He kissed her deeply, then dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I'm your pa, and I promise I'm going to do right by you." Loretta ran her fingers through his long hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The pregnancy was harder than she had expected. Morning sickness plagued her through the first months, and Garrett worried over her constantly, making sure she ate and rested and did not overwork herself. He took over most of the household tasks, insisting she save her strength, and he made her a rocking chair that fit her perfectly, placing it near the fire where she could sit and sew tiny clothes for the baby. Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled high around the cabin and temperatures that dropped until the water froze in the pipes. But the cabin was warm and well stocked, and Loretta felt safe with Garrett beside her, his large body radiating heat when they curled together under the quilts at night. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the life they were building together. Loretta told him about her fears that she would not know how to be a mother, that something would go wrong, that she was not strong enough for this. Garrett held her and told her she was the strongest person he knew, that she had survived things that would have broken other people, and that their child was lucky to have her. "I love you," Loretta said one night, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know we didn't start this marriage with love, but I love you now. Completely." Garrett's eyes were suspiciously bright in the firelight. "I love you too. Have for months, but I didn't want to say it until you were ready to hear it." They made love slowly that night, careful of her growing belly, murmuring promises against each other's skin. Their son was born in March, during a late snowstorm that kept them trapped in the cabin for 3 days. Loretta labored for hours, Garrett beside her the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement, even when she screamed at him that this was his fault. When the baby finally emerged, wailing and red-faced, Garrett cut the cord with steady hands and placed the tiny boy on Loretta's chest. "He's perfect," Garrett said, his voice breaking. "You did so well, Loretta. He's perfect." They named him Gabriel, after Garrett's father, and he had Loretta's dark hair and Garrett's blue eyes. Loretta had never known it was possible to love something so much it physically hurt. But watching Garrett hold their son, his huge hands cradling the infant with infinite care, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Gabriel was a good baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Garrett was a devoted father, waking in the night to help with feedings, carrying Gabriel in a sling while he did his work, singing old songs in his rumbling voice that made the baby's eyes drift closed. Loretta wore her 5 dresses and chose a different one each morning, though now they were often stained with spit-up and milk. She did not care. She had never been happier. When Gabriel was 6 months old, Loretta discovered she was pregnant again. Garrett laughed with delight and spun her in a circle, careful not to jostle the baby on her hip. Their daughter was born in December, a small, fierce thing they named Grace after Loretta's mother. She had Garrett's temperament, calm and patient, and she watched the world with serious eyes. Gabriel adored her immediately, toddling over to peer into her cradle and pat her head with clumsy affection. 2 children in a mountain cabin should have felt overwhelming, but somehow it just felt right. The cabin rang with laughter and occasional tears, with the sounds of family life that filled all the spaces that had once been silent. Garrett built additions to the cabin as the children grew: an extra bedroom, a larger kitchen, a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set. Loretta's 5 dresses wore out eventually, patched and repatched until even her careful mending could not save them. Garrett made her 5 new ones, this time enlisting her help because she had learned to sew over the years, though she was never as skilled as he was. They chose the fabrics together on a trip to town, and Loretta picked colors she loved: a deep rose, a golden yellow, a blue the color of summer sky, a rich brown, and a green that matched the pines around their home. The tradition of choosing a dress each morning continued, and the children learned to ask, "Which dress today, Mama?" as if it were a game. Loretta always told them, and they always told her she looked beautiful, parroting what they heard their father say every single day. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and milestones. Gabriel grew tall and strong like his father, learning to trap and hunt and live off the land. Grace was quieter, but no less capable, with a gift for growing things that made their garden flourish. 2 more children followed another boy they named George, and finally a daughter they named Lily, and each one was loved fiercely and completely. The cabin expanded to accommodate them all until it was more compound than single dwelling, with outbuildings and gardens and a small barn for the growing number of animals. Garrett's trapping business thrived, and they made trips to Terlingua several times a year, where they were known and respected, part of the fabric of the community despite living so far from town. Loretta looked back on her old life sometimes, on the desperate woman she had been when she arrived in Terlingua with nothing but 2 ruined dresses and terror in her heart. It felt like a different person, a different lifetime. She had been so certain she had nothing to offer, that no one would want her or value her. And then Garrett Morrison had offered her a choice when she had none, had given her 5 dresses and the freedom to choose, and in doing so had given her everything else as well. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised her by taking her on a trip, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with a trusted neighbor family. They rode into the mountains to a place he had been preparing in secret, a small cabin even more remote than their home, with a view that stretched for miles. "I built this for us," he said. "A place to come when we need to remember what it was like at the beginning, when it was just the 2 of us learning each other." Inside, the cabin was simple but beautiful, with a bed piled high with quilts and a fireplace already laid with wood. On hooks on the wall hung 5 dresses, exact replicas of the first 5 Garrett had made her all those years ago. Loretta touched them with trembling fingers. "You made these?" "I did. Took me months, working on them when you were in town or busy with the kids. I wanted you to have them again, the way they were at the start." He came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "You still choose a dress every morning, even after all these years. It matters to you. So I wanted to make sure you always have that choice." Loretta turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much. I love you too. Every single day, more than the day before." They spent 3 days in that cabin, making love and talking and remembering all the ways their life had unfolded. Loretta wore each of the 5 dresses, savoring the feel of them, the way they reminded her of that first summer when everything had been new and uncertain and full of possibility. On the last night, as they lay tangled together under the quilts, Garrett traced patterns on her bare shoulder. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me? Coming up here? Never, Loretta said fiercely. You gave me a life, Garrett. A real life, not just survival. You gave me choices and respect and love. You gave me a family and a home. How could I ever regret that? I'm glad, he said simply, because you gave me all those things too. They returned home to chaos and laughter, their children spilling out of the main cabin to greet them, everyone talking at once about everything that had happened in their absence. Loretta hugged them all, breathing in the scent of her babies, who were not babies anymore, feeling the solid presence of Garrett at her back, and knew that this was what happiness looked like. The years continued their steady march. Gabriel married a woman from Terlingua and built his own cabin nearby, close enough to help but far enough for independence. Grace found love with a rancher's son and moved to Montana, writing long letters that Loretta treasured. George became a teacher, traveling to settlements throughout the territory, and Lily, their youngest, showed signs of wanting to follow in her father's footsteps, learning to trap and track with a skill that made Garrett burst with pride. Loretta and Garrett grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and good living. But Garrett was still strong, still capable, his arms still capable of lifting her easily when the mood struck him. And Loretta still chose a dress every morning, still felt a thrill of pleasure at the simple act of deciding what to wear. They had built something together, she realized. Not just a home or a family, but a life that honored both of them, that gave them both room to be who they were while growing into something larger together. On a summer evening when Loretta was 50 years old, she sat on the porch with Garrett, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become as familiar as breathing. Gabriel's children were playing in the yard, their laughter rising into the warm air, and Loretta felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, his hand finding hers. "I'm thinking about the morning we got married," Loretta said. "How terrified I was. How certain I was that I was making a mistake. And now? Now I know it was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything, Garrett. Everything I needed and so much I didn't even know to want. You gave me the same," Garrett said. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Every morning for more than 20 years, I've watched you choose a dress, and every morning I've thought about how lucky I am that you chose me too." Loretta leaned her head on his shoulder, his solidity comforting and familiar. "I'll always choose you. And I'll always make sure you have the choice." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded, surrounded by the sounds of family and home, knowing that tomorrow would bring another morning, another choice, another day of the life they had built together, from nothing but hope and kindness, and the simple act of caring for each other. Loretta thought about the woman she had been, desperate and alone in a strange town, and the woman she had become, surrounded by love and security, and the knowledge that she mattered. The journey between those two versions of herself had been made possible by a man who had seen her at her worst and offered her his best, who had given her 5 dresses and the freedom to choose, and in doing so had given her a reason to believe in herself. As night fell and the stars emerged overhead, Garrett stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, wife, let's go to bed." Loretta took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet, and followed him inside to the life they had created, the home they had built, the love that had grown from the simplest of gifts into something vast and unshakable. She had never picked which dress to wear for most of her life, trapped by poverty and circumstance into wearing whatever rags she could find. But Garrett had made her 5 dresses and let her choose every morning, and in doing so had taught her that she deserved to make choices, that her preferences mattered, that she was worthy of care and consideration. It was such a small thing, really. 5 dresses. A daily choice. But it had been the beginning of everything. Been the first sign that this strange marriage might become something real. The first gift that had cracked open her guarded heart. The first indication that Garrett Morrison was a man who kept his promises and honored his commitments. From 5 dresses had grown a love that sustained them through hardship and joy. Through children and grandchildren. Through decades of shared life in the mountains they both loved. From 5 dresses had come a family, a home, a partnership that balanced strength with tenderness and independence, with devotion. Loretta climbed into their bed, worn smooth by years of use, and Garrett wrapped his arms around her, his body a familiar warmth in the darkness. She thought about tomorrow, about which dress she would choose, about the endless, small decisions that made up a life lived fully and freely. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Garrett murmured back. "Always have, always will." And Loretta closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another morning, another choice, another day of this beautiful, hard-won life they had built together. One dress, one decision, one act of love at a time. The years rolled on with the changing seasons, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Loretta and Garrett's children gave them grandchildren who filled the mountain compound with energy and laughter. The original cabin had become the heart of a small family settlement, with Gabriel's home visible through the trees on one side and a cabin for visiting family members on the other. Loretta still wore her 5 dresses in rotation, though she was on her 3rd set now, each one made with love by Garrett's patient hands. The act of choosing had become a morning ritual that grounded her, a moment of quiet decision that reminded her every single day that her life was her own, that she had agency and value. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. There was music and dancing, food and stories, and a warmth that came from being surrounded by people who loved each other. Gabriel stood to make a toast, raising his glass toward his parents. "To Ma and Pa," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Who taught us that love isn't just a feeling? It's 1,000 small actions done with care. Who showed us that respect and kindness matter more than passion, though they had plenty of that too." He grinned as Loretta blushed and Garrett laughed. "Who built a life together that gave all of us a foundation to build our own lives on. We love you both." The toast was echoed by everyone gathered, and Loretta felt tears slip down her cheeks. Garrett squeezed her hand, his eyes equally wet. That night, after everyone had finally settled into sleep in various corners of the compound, Loretta and Garrett slipped away to walk under the stars. The mountain air was cool and clean, and the sky above was so thick with stars, it looked like diamonds scattered on velvet. "Hard to believe it's been 30 years, Garrett said. "Feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once." "I know what you mean," Loretta said. She stopped walking and turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "I need you to know something. I need you to understand what you gave me." "Loretta, no, let me say this." She squeezed his hands. "When I came to Terlingua, I was so broken I didn't even recognize it. I thought I was just poor, just unlucky. But it was deeper than that. I had been told my whole life that I didn't matter, that my thoughts and feelings and preferences were irrelevant. My father, my circumstances, everything had taught me to make myself small and accept whatever scraps I was given." Garrett's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting her speak. "And then you offered to marry me, and I thought it was just another version of the same thing. A practical arrangement where I would trade my labor for survival. I didn't expect kindness. I didn't expect to be seen." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But then you made me 5 dresses. Such a simple thing, but you gave me a choice. You told me every single morning through those dresses that what I wanted mattered, that I deserved to decide things for myself, even something as small as what to wear." "It should have been the bare minimum," Garrett said roughly. "Every woman deserves that." "Maybe they should, but most don't get it. I certainly never had." Loretta smiled up at him. "You gave me more than dresses, Garrett. You gave me myself. You taught me that I was worth caring for, worth listening to, worth loving. Every choice you let me make, every time you asked my opinion, every moment you treated me like an equal partner, you were rebuilding me piece by piece into someone who knew her own value." Garrett pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. "You always had value, Loretta. I just made sure you knew it. And that's everything," she whispered against his chest. "That's the whole world." They stood together under the stars. Two people who had found each other in the midst of desperation and built something that would outlast them both. Around them, their family slept peacefully, safe and loved, the fruits of the life they had created together. Time continued its relentless forward march. Loretta turned 60, then 65, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her hands showing the marks of decades of work. Garrett's beard was fully gray now, and his shoulders, while still broad and strong, carried the weight of years. But their love had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened, mellowing into something comfortable and unshakable. They still made love, though less frequently now, and with the easy familiarity of people who knew every inch of each other's bodies. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sun set and talking about their day. And Loretta still chose a dress every morning, now from the 4th set Garrett had made her, and he still told her she looked beautiful, no matter which one she picked. When Loretta was 68, she fell ill with a fever that had Garrett pacing the cabin in terror. Gabriel rode for the doctor in Terlingua, and the whole family gathered, faces drawn with worry. But Loretta fought the illness with the same stubborn strength she had brought to everything else in her life, and after 2 weeks, she recovered, weak but alive. Garrett had barely left her side the entire time, sleeping in a chair beside their bed, bathing her face with cool cloths, coaxing her to eat and drink. When she was finally well enough to sit up on her own, she looked at him and saw the fear still lingering in his eyes. "I'm all right," she assured him. "I'm not leaving you yet." "You better not," Garrett said, his voice thick. "I'm not done with you. We've got years left, you and me." "Years," Loretta agreed. "I promise." She kept that promise. They had 10 more years together, 10 more years of choosing dresses and sharing meals and watching their family grow. 10 more years of the small intimacies that made up a marriage, the way Garrett still reached for her hand when they walked, the way Loretta still made his coffee exactly how he liked it, the way they could communicate entire conversations with just a look. Garrett died first, on a spring morning when the mountains were green with new growth. He went peacefully in his sleep, his hand clasped in Loretta's, his last words a murmured, "Love you." Loretta held him as his breathing slowed and stopped, and felt something fundamental tear inside her chest. The grief was enormous, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. But it was also a testament to what they had shared, to the depth of the love they had built over 42 years of marriage. Loretta mourned him with her whole being, but she also celebrated him, telling stories to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the man who had given a desperate woman 5 dresses and changed her entire life. She lived another 5 years after Garrett's death, staying in the mountain cabin they had built together, surrounded by family who made sure she was never alone for long. She wore her 5 dresses in rotation, choosing one each morning. And though the act brought sadness now, it also brought comfort. It was a connection to Garrett, a daily reminder of his love and the life they had shared. On the morning of her death, Loretta woke early and dressed herself in the green dress, the color of the pines that surrounded her home. She felt tired in a way that went beyond the physical, but also at peace. She had lived a good life, a full life, and she had been loved and had loved in return. Her youngest granddaughter found her later that morning, sitting in the rocking chair Garrett had made for her decades earlier, the green dress smooth around her hands folded peacefully in her lap. She looked serene, almost smiling, and on the table beside her was a note in her careful handwriting. "I chose the green dress today because it was the first one Garrett made me, and I want to be wearing it when I see him again. Tell everyone I love them. Tell them that the secret to happiness is not in big grand gestures, but in the small daily choices to care for each other, to see each other, to honor the humanity in your partner. Tell them that 5 dresses and the freedom to choose taught me everything I needed to know about love. And tell them that I died grateful for every single day I was given with all of you." They buried her beside Garrett on the mountainside, under the pines they had both loved. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, to honor a woman who had come to the mountains with nothing and left behind a legacy of love and family, and the quiet strength that comes from being truly seen and valued. Years later, when Gabriel's great-granddaughter was getting married, she asked to hear the story of her ancestors, of how Loretta and Garrett had met and built their life together. Gabriel's daughter told her the tale about the desperate woman in 2 ragged dresses and the mountain man who had made her 5 more and given her the freedom to choose. "That's so romantic," the young woman said, tears in her eyes. "He saw exactly what she needed." "He did," her grandmother agreed. "But more than that, he understood that small acts of respect and kindness matter more than grand declarations. He didn't just give her dresses. He gave her back herself." The young woman thought about that, and on her wedding day, she asked her groom to make her a promise. "Promise me that you'll always see me as a person with my own thoughts and needs and preferences. Promise me that you'll give me the space to choose, even in small things." Her groom, who understood the weight of family history, promised. And in doing so, carried forward the legacy that Loretta and Garrett had started all those decades ago, the understanding that love was built on a foundation of respect, that caring for someone meant honoring their autonomy, and that sometimes the most powerful gift was the simple freedom to choose. The mountain compound remained in the family for generations, each new occupant adding their own chapters to the story, while honoring those who came before. And in a place of honor, in the main cabin, carefully preserved behind glass, hung 5 dresses, green and blue and brown and cream and burgundy, a testament to a love that had started with a practical arrangement and grown into something that shaped a family's understanding of what it meant to truly care for another person. The dresses were faded now, the fabric worn thin in places despite careful preservation. But they remained powerful symbols of a truth that resonated through the generations. That everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, and to have the freedom to make choices about their own life, no matter how small those choices might seem. And on quiet mornings, when the sun rose over the mountains and painted the pines in shades of gold, those who lived in the compound said you could almost see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the trees, a large man with broad shoulders and long hair, and a woman in a green dress, choosing each morning to walk beside him, choosing love over and over again, the way she had every day of their lives together.